G.F. Skinner's behaviorism is not merely a descriptive science of animal behavior, a descriptive science seeking to account for what rats and pigeons do in small boxes. Skinner intended his behavioral psychology to be nothing less than a means by which to engineer society as a whole and make the world a better place. There is a very definite utopian theme in Skinner's writings, both his fictional writings. He did an interesting book called Walden II, which presents a world that would be regulated according to the principles of operant conditioning. And he wrote a quite interesting nonfiction work, which I'll refer to later in lecture, called Beyond Freedom and Dignity, in which he tests the moral implications of a developed descriptive science of behavior. But in Skinnerian psychology, the stakes are very high. This is not simply an attempt to get better at animal training or to make circuses more orderly affairs. The bottom line here is to change the world. And Skinner is confident that behaviorism is the right way to do that, because Skinner is confident that the world as we find it is itself the outcome of reinforcement histories that have been entered into by the people of the world. Children, after all, are shaped. This is the whole process of socialization and acculturation. The idea that there's something sinister in behaviorism, because by the application of M&Ms or kisses or hugs and the like, you're systematically manipulating the behavior of someone else. Well, for goodness sake, says Skinner, this is what goes on 16, 18 hours a day. So it's not a question of whether one is going to attempt to control the behavior of others. It really is a question, practically and pragmatically, of whether you're going to do it well or poorly. And in fact, parents have already settled the question about behavioral control. They're desperate to be able to control the behavior of their children. So with John B. Watson, Skinner is prepared to say, we'll show you how to do it. Now, is this a threat to the notion of human autonomy, free will, and the like? As you might guess, Skinner regards this very terminology as a throwback to ages of superstition, to religio-mystical notions, and the like. What do you gain through the idea of autonomy over and against what you already know when you see an environmental option being presented and Smith behaving in such a way as to secure it? If you know this is something Smith is going to do you know anything further by saying he did it because he wanted to do it, or he did it even though he didn't want to do it? The datum that counts is his doing it. The world gets in trouble not as a result of free will versus determinism or autonomy or moral theories and the like. The world gets in trouble because of behavior that takes place in the world. Not because of the hidden, dark, deep Freudian motives that preoccupy the realms of the unconscious. Who knows about that? Oh, I guess psychoanalysts do, or at least claim to. But Skinner says this isn't what actually causes murder, mayhem, death, destruction, thievery, sainthood, etc. Behavior is what enters into descriptions of people as felons, saints, heroes, and the like. I should say that when I find myself in a behavioristic frame of mind, which, to be perfectly candid about it, is extremely rarely, and I usually will find that frame of mind dissipating very quickly just by opening a window and perhaps putting on a Schubert quintet or something. But when I do find myself in a behavioristic frame of mind and want to inform students that they are the products of this sort of reinforcement history, I like to take the example of freshmen coming in for advice on what courses they should be taking in the spring term. It's always good to do this with freshmen. They have very few presuppositions, and there's still a kind of academic innocence about them. And so you say, I see that you've tentatively put down chemistry and biology and calculus. Why is that? Oh, well, I'm pre-med. Oh, I see, you're pre-med. Is your mother or is your father a physician? Oh, no. Or an uncle, or no. There aren't any doctors in my family. I see. Are you strongly encouraged to go into medicine? Because it's a very demanding form of life, and of course you've got 4 more years after college to study medicine, and then internships and residencies, and with managed health care you might actually find yourself standing out with a tin cup trying to raise enough money to send your children to Georgetown and so on. No, there's been no encouragement at home. This really is my own. I mean, I just freely arrived at the idea that medicine is for me. I see. And when did that happen? Well, I always wanted to be a doctor. Oh, did you? Did you want to be a doctor when you were 6 weeks old? Oh, no, not as an infant, you know, but as long as I can remember. I see. And as best you can tell, this is something you arrived at on your own. Yes. Well, now, that, by the way, is something of a parody, but a parody of a conversation that I have had hundreds of times over a course of 30-plus years of university teaching, and my colleagues can add their experiences to these. This is a quite common discourse that takes place between academic advisors and undergraduate students. Well, suppose we entered into the life of this young man or young woman to see what actually was going on. Well, I say in my Skinnerian frame of mind, I would argue this sort of thing is what's going on. We'll just call the student Billy. Well, little Billy comes home, and Billy is 6 years old, and he comes running into the house, and his mind is made up now, and he comes over to his mother, or today perhaps a caregiver of one sort or another, but he comes running over and he says, "I'm going to be a fireman." And whereupon he is told to wash his hands and get ready for supper, and that's the end of it. Short shrift is made of this. Not much of a discussion here. Now, at 7.5 years old, he comes running in again. This time he's just come back from the local movie theater, and he tells his parents in no uncertain terms that he has now found a mission in life. He's going to be a cowboy. Well, they start to make Lady Macbeth out of this poor child because he's again told to wash up and get ready for supper. So off he goes and he starts washing up again. Now, at 11 years old, he comes in and says something that I actually think I said when I was 11 years old, and that is that I was more or less committed to pitching for the New York Yankees. And I recall my father saying, "Everybody in the world wants to pitch for the New York Yankees." Now, my father didn't tell me that at that point I should wash my hands or anything, but it became quite clear to me that he didn't think this was a particularly promising prospect. Well, now Billy comes in, let's say at 12 years old, and he has just applied scalpel to the abdominal wall of a dead frog. He has opened up the visceral cavity, and he now starts seeing the organs of circulation and digestion and the like, and his mind is made up, and he comes home, and still in a kind of reverie from this experience. The frog is in something rather more fatal than a reverie, I should point out, but still in something of a reverie from this experience, he says quietly, over supper, people talking about the Dow Jones average or what the President's State of the Union address might have been. And then they notice that Billy hasn't had much to say tonight, and the parents say, "And how goes it with you, Will?" And Will looks up in a kind of philosophical way and says, "You know, I think I want to be a surgeon." Well, things start changing fairly quickly in this household. For example, on his next birthday, Will discovers, wrapped up very, very fancily, a microscope, of all things, with little slides with blood cells on them and that kind of thing. Christmas time, there's the old Gilbert chemistry set or Gray's Anatomy. Turns out that when Aunt Martha comes over for tea, she wants Will to take her pulse. She thinks maybe she might be running a bit of high blood pressure, or her cholesterol might not be properly balanced. And Uncle Jack's arthritis is acting up. And do you think it's a good idea to take aspirin? Well, the long and the short of it is this. Willie, Billy boy, with this one utterance, this one single word, surgeon, has garnered the attention of a significant fraction of the world's adult population. I mean, just short of getting into movies free. Now, The point one wants to make is that a fair amount of reinforcing is going on in a highly incidental way. You don't even have to set out to shape behavior and control it. There doesn't have to be some sort of fascist motive. It just happens. People smile at each other. They compliment each other on their dress. They use facial expressions and posture and the like. All this reliably matching up with a certain effect one knows this will have on others. If you do have a significant other in your life, and I'm sure you have some significant other in life, and significant other comes in and says, by the way, I just bought this tie, and the reply is, oh, did you? This one, remember now, it's just 3 words, oh, did you? This can have a devastating effect, do you see? Whereas my, how nice, has a radically different effect. Now, what is the effect? The oh, did you effect is no more plaid. Do you see? I think this one is plaid. Yes, no more plaid. The oh, how nice is plaid. Positive reinforcement. Do it again. Increase the response rate. Of course, on this account, people would have closets filled with plaid ties. So there's obviously a problem here. We will get into that anon. But incidental reinforcement is the order of the day. Now, there are other occasions in which you see this operating. I find it particularly manifest at Christmas time in these shopping malls, these abominable places that obviously were put up as sort of upper middle class concentration camps where you get privileges to leave for a few hours, whereupon you must be back first thing the next morning, usually to return what it was you took away the previous day. Now, I sort of traipse around, as you might guess I would. I sort of traipse around as the major decisions are made by my beloved, who's in a much better position to do this than I am, and I usually say, yes, Jack will like that. Mary surely will like that. No, I think they'd probably want a blue one, and you mope around. But while this is going on, I usually check out the behavioristic dimensions of the operation. What you'll find is this. Parents are unbelievable. They're so easily embarrassed. So there's mother and dad, or mother or dad, trailing little Jane up and down the aisles, and little Jane says something fairly harmless like, I'd like some candy, or let's have candy. And the parent says, no, it'll spoil your supper. I want candy. No, you'll have some candy after supper, but you can't have any now. Now do be still. I want some candy. Will you please quiet down? I want some. All right, here's some candy. Now, ask yourself, what is being reinforced here? What's being reinforced is the following. If at first you don't succeed, shout louder. So surely if you said to the parent, what kind of behavior are you trying to shape or train into this little girl? She'd say, well, what I'm trying to shape in, to use a rather infelicitous expression, is courteous and decorous behavior. Well, then don't give candy for shouting and screaming. Well, what should I do? And you know what the answer is, the behaviorist's answer is, nothing. I want candy. Oh, this is a nice vase, isn't it, George? Yes, it is. I want candy. By the way, do they have furniture on the 3rd floor here? I want some candy. You know, we parked the car a little far from the entrance. I hope it isn't raining out. Can I have some candy? And, you know, moreover, oh, did you just say something? Can I have some candy? You see, you're now shaping the volume. Now, I know this looks terribly sinister, but of course, this is what is done all the time, whether one wants to housebreak a pet, or housebreak or toilet train a child, or in fact encourage a loved one, or deal with a colleague, or get a president to propose a certain course of action, or have your congressman represent a favorite cause. We are shaping each other's behavior, at least on the behaviorist's account, all the time. And the question is, how can we do it effectively, and how can we do it in such a way as to secure the behavioral ends we have in mind without bringing a lot of woeful behavior along with it? So on the question of the ethics of behavioral control, Skinner would argue that that actually is not on the table. We must control behavior. It's part of creating a civilized, ordered life. So that it's going to be controlled, there is no doubt. How and by whom and toward what end happens to involve yet other considerations. But behavior control qua behavior control cannot possibly raise an ethical issue because it's an absolutely unavoidable practice. Now, consistent with this is the view that everything we take to be a social problem is indeed a behavioral problem. So correctional institutes, prisons, psychiatric wards, psychotherapy, so-called, in all the instances in which what we seek to achieve is some improvement in a social condition, Skinner would argue that at the end of the day, what you're really attempting to achieve is an alteration in behavior. If you can change the behavior, you have the desired outcome. Whatever theory you might have about what's going on inside to produce that outcome. So as you might guess, behavioristic forms of therapy became very, very popular and indeed enjoyed quite a good press for quite some time. I think it's fair to say that the behavioristic approach to psychopathology was quite oversold in the 1950s and 60s. There's still room for it here and there. I might mention one experiment that was done that attracted a lot of attention at the time, though I don't think much happened to it afterwards. There's a particular form of schizophrenia, a type of schizophrenia known as catatonia, in which the means by which the psyche removes itself from a threatening or hostile environment is a sensory and motor means. The catatonic schizophrenic is unresponsive, very often sits silently for days and weeks, might display utter passivity, a condition called wexiflexibilitas. You raise the hand stays up, you bend the wrist back, there's almost so total a passivity that forced feeding can become necessary from time to time. There seems to be no sensory or motor contact with the world, no plan to be realized, no purposes or intentions. Well, behavior therapists back in the 1950s thought that this would be an ideal patient population to test out certain behavioristic principles. That is, shouldn't it be possible to get the catatonic patient moving in a purposive way using precisely the techniques that are used to control organismic behavior anywhere else? Well, I shall make this a short tale, and the details are not all that important, but the procedure was as follows. An apparatus was brought into the hospital, a vending machine type apparatus, which had different items in it. And it was put at the foot of the bed of the targeted patients. Initially, to activate the machine, all the patient had to do was look at it. That is, if the patient, with one-way mirrors allowing an observation of the patient, if the patient made sustained eye contact with the device would deliver something. It might deliver sound, it might deliver an object, it could deliver a candy bar, whatever. Over a course of days, gazing at the machine was not sufficient. You actually had to make physical contact. You could stretch out and touch it with a toe, but if you did that, it would pay off, and it would only pay off if some physical contact was made. Now, as the results of this study were written up, what the investigators claim to have established is this. In a course of months, not only were the patients actually operating the levers to secure various items in the machine, but where the machine contained items of only one kind and a neighboring machine items of another kind, there was actually trading going on between patients in adjacent beds. And in fact, in some cases, this got the patients to the point where they actually could work in the hospital cafeteria, make change, provide items, and so forth. Now, I mention this not as a new approach to the dreadful, woeful condition of catatonic schizophrenia. I mention this because it raises a very interesting question. Suppose, in fact, schizophrenia, as I think most contemporary experts on the subject would argue, is a genetically predisposed condition that comes about chiefly as a result of alterations in the interior milieu of the nervous system, particularly the transmitter pathways in the brain, and in fact is best approached therapeutically through some neuropharmacologic procedure. Suppose we take that to be the right view of the case. The case is obviously much too complex to be reduced to a few certainties of that kind. But as an overview, we say, look, schizophrenia is essentially a neurochemical disturbance, ultimately, effectively, to be treated by neuropharmacologic approaches. And suppose it were also the case that through a regimen of behavioral conditioning, you could start getting a catatonic schizophrenic to behave in an unremarkable way, maybe even to the point of holding down a job and the like. What I find interesting is that in just that case, you might find yourself inclined to say, so the behavior, after all, doesn't represent what's going on and would give you an entirely distorted picture of what's going on. It would be very much like giving a diabetic insulin and saying the diabetic is cured. The diabetic is only, quote, cured in the sense that the symptoms are relieved by way of insulin. Well, some have argued that the achievements behavior therapy can claim are not really achievements in the sense of clearing up a disordered or diseased condition, but in providing a kind of behavioral camouflage for an underlying condition that is still in place. I mention this because it shows that the same behavioral datum, the same symptom pattern, will lend itself to a variety of interpretations entirely incompatible with each other, and each of the interpretations coherent within its own framework. Now, I mentioned at the beginning of lecture that one of Skinner's influential non-fiction works was titled Beyond Freedom and Dignity. In fact, Beyond Freedom and Dignity got Skinner to the cover of Time magazine. This is not a place occupied by many psychologists. I think if Freud had lived long enough, he surely would have made the cover of Time magazine. But you won't find many psychologists on the cover of Time magazine. And in fact, Skinner was already one of the premier psychologists in the world long before he wrote Beyond Freedom and Dignity. Well, he made the cover of Time magazine because this was an extremely controversial book. I can give you a couple of phrases out of Beyond Freedom and Dignity. Well, one phrase stands out, perhaps above all: no praise, no blame. No praise, no blame. Now, what is Skinner getting at with this? And what is he getting at with the phrase beyond freedom and dignity? He's getting at this. Humanistic perspectives on human nature have emphasized our moral autonomy, our fitness for praise and blame, our requirement to seek heroic levels of achievement, condemnations of those of us who do not have such aspirations, the blameworthiness of people who do not live up to the expectations of others, now blamed because they are regarded as being morally faulty, morally deficient. Something inside them isn't good. They have to be changed. They're the wrong sort, the wrong type. They're defective. This is the traditional, Skinner says this is the traditional view. The hero is the hero because the hero is possessed of some extraordinary inner strength, inner spirit. The coward is a coward because the coward lacks that special ingredient. The saint is the saint because of some transcendent level of grace enjoyed by the saint, such that the saint is able to do what an ordinary mortal can't. It's something inside the saint. And the criminal is the criminal because of something inside the criminal, the bad type, the bad sort. Skinner says this is what you get when you fail to appreciate that the determinants of behavior are not inside the organism, they are in the environment. So the behavior that you're looking at and prepared to condemn is behavior that was engineered into that organism. Thus, there really are no moral grounds for blame at all. It certainly isn't the behavior's fault thus to have been shaped. And when you stand around applauding this or that performance, this or that achievement, understand that, again, what you're looking at is the result of a lifetime reinforcement history that has inclined that person's behavior in directions that gain the approval, support, applause, and commendation of society. Why praise it? You're simply praising the well-trained animal for doing what the well-trained animal was well-trained to do. Now, once you get out of this award of the week, or dunce cap mentality. Once you give up the easy habit of bringing moral judgments to bear on those who have been conditioned to be the way they are, you can turn your attention to the real sources of commendable and condemnable behavior, and the real sources are found in the environment. The child who is reinforced for shouting becomes the bully, becomes the persistent, aggressive, never had enough, do what I tell you, give me what I want, if you don't, I'll keep this up and up and up. Everybody finds such a person obnoxious, and everybody wants to blame that person. If you want to blame anybody, blame those who were applying positive reinforcers for a form of behavior that now has become habitual. And if, in fact, you want Billy to get into Harvard and Jane to get into Yale, then early on, Billy and Jane are to be exposed to a reinforcing regimen that will incline behavior in that direction. The question then of human freedom and human dignity needn't ever even be brought up. It's something we ought to get beyond. The question really shouldn't be, did Smith do what he did freely, volitionally, autonomously, and the like? The question shouldn't be, are human beings in their very nature dignified entities, worthy of respect and the like? Understand that the essential fact of human life is the essential fact of all animal life. Adaptive behavior designed to meet the demands and challenges of the external world. A conditioning history that inclines that behavior in one direction rather than another, and depending on the actualities of the environment and the conditioning history, the behavior may be adaptive or maladaptive, successful or unsuccessful, triumphant or failing. None of this best understood in terms of something going on inside the organism or inside the person, inside the neighbor, inside the spouse, rather understood in terms of the environmental contingencies that rewarded certain responses and punished others. Well, this, of course, challenges ancient philosophical, moral, religious propositions. It tests what we might be inclined to take to be the certainties of common sense. It certainly violates what we take to be the sources of our own behavior, or at least is entirely contrary to what we take to be the sources of our own behavior. Most of us take a look at an external world that summons us to do something, and we believe that we step back at that point and ask, is this really something I should do? And if we reach the settled conclusion that it's something we shouldn't do, all the rewards on heaven and earth will not be enough to get us to do it. That's the picture we have of ourselves. Now, Skinner says there's a reinforcement history that goes into shaping people to have judgments like that themselves. After all, you can wield a great degree of power in the world under the rubrics of praise and blame. As long as we can single each other out for rewards, commendations, and punishments, we can shape behavior through these things. These only work, of course, if the recipient of the reward and the recipient of the punishment regards himself as autonomous, free, and therefore responsible for what it was he did. Once you take away this notion of freedom and autonomy, of course, handing out rewards or punishments would strike the recipient as unintelligible. Why is this going on? I did what I did because that narrative that constitutes the history of rewards and punishments that have shaped me into the sort of being I am made it essentially inevitable that I would do what I did. Skinner takes the same perspective and brings it into the classroom. The reason people fail is because they're not emitting the right responses. If you want them to emit the right responses, put together the material to be learned in small steps as if it were bar pressing, and step by step, the organism never makes a mistake. He fills in the blank, he learns the right word, he goes through at his own pace, he defines his own reinforcements. You specify in advance what are the, to use the argot, what are the terminal stimulus response connections, and in systematic workbook fashion, you put together materials that students master because the steps are so small and intelligently laid out that they can't get it wrong. Skinner says the school systems that we have are designed to fail people. You know you're doing it right when some fraction of the class fails. What sort of attitude is that about education? So behaviorism and the engineering of society plans to touch us at the level of education, at the level of moral philosophy, penology, child rearing, and the like. Extremely influential, a very, very broad database, and at the same time a system that is bloated with controversy and contradictions in its own right.